7-year-old boy calls 911 because he heard his teenage sister screaming from his stepfather's room. When the police arrive and enter the room, everyone is shocked. The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees lining Cedar Street, scattering red and gold leaves across the neatly maintained lawns of suburban Boston. 7-year-old Ethan Baker sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, methodically arranging his collection of Hot Wheels cars by color. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through his window, creating patterns on the blue carpet his mom had chosen when they moved into the house 3 years ago. From downstairs, he could hear the familiar sounds of Richard cooking dinner, the clinking of pots, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, and the occasional sigh of exasperation that seemed to accompany everything his stepfather did. Ethan's small hands paused over a bright yellow Corvette as Lily's footsteps hurried past his door. She was probably heading to her room again, where she spent most of her time nowadays. Ethan remembered when Lily used to play with him after school, helping him build elaborate racetracks across the living room floor or reading him stories with funny voices for each character. That was before Richard moved in. Before Mom started working longer shifts at the hospital. Before Lily stopped smiling so much. Lily. Richard's voice boomed from downstairs. Get down here and set the table. Ethan heard his sister's door open and close, her footsteps now slower, hesitant. He abandoned his cars and crept to his doorway, peering down the hallway. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, her long brown hair hiding her face like a curtain. She wore the oversized gray sweater she'd barely taken off since school started, even though the house was warm. Move it. Richard's voice carried up the stairs. I don't have all day to wait for you to do a simple task. Ethan watched as his 12-year-old sister descended the stairs, one hand trailing along the banister. He noticed how she made herself smaller somehow, shoulders hunched forward, head down. Nothing like the Lily who used to cartwheel across the backyard and sing Taylor Swift songs at the top of her lungs. Following quietly, Ethan sat on the middle step where he could see into the kitchen. Richard stood at the stove, his broad back turned to Lily as she began taking plates from the cabinet. At 39, Richard Cooper cut an imposing figure, tall and solid, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples. To Ethan's second-grade classmates, he was Mr. Cooper, the respected middle school teacher who sometimes helped coach Little League. But at home, he was different. Can't you do anything right? Richard's sharp words cut through the kitchen as Lily fumbled with the silverware, a fork clattering to the floor. Clumsy little brat. Pick it up. Ethan watched his sister quickly bend to retrieve the fork, her hands trembling slightly as she placed it in the sink and took a clean one from the drawer. Richard turned from the stove, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. Lily flinched, nearly dropping the handful of utensils she held. Look at me when I'm talking to you, Richard demanded, his voice low and controlled. Lily raised her head slowly, and Ethan could see her face now, pale and tight, like she was holding her breath. What's wrong with you lately? Your mother told me about your math test. AD? Are you trying to embarrass me at school? No, Lily whispered. I'm sorry. I'll do better. Sorry doesn't cut it. You're lucky your mother works so hard to support you kids. The least you could do is show some gratitude by not acting like an idiot. Ethan's small fingers gripped the banister tighter. He wanted to say something, to tell Richard to stop being mean to Lily, but his voice seemed stuck in his throat. He remembered last week when he tried to defend her during dinner, and Richard had sent him to his room without eating, telling him that little boys should mind their own business. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the tension. Lily quickly resumed setting the table while Richard returned to the stove, his demeanor shifting instantly. By the time Grace Baker entered through the side door, grocery bags in her arms, the kitchen looked like a normal family scene. Something smells good, Grace said, setting down the bags. She looked tired after her shift at the hospital, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Hi, sweetie, she added, kissing Lily's cheek as she passed. Just trying something new with the chicken, Richard replied, his voice warm and pleasant now. Lily, why don't you help your mother with the groceries instead of standing around? Ethan watched as his sister hurried to comply, her movements quick and nervous. His mom didn't seem to notice, already chatting with Richard about her day at work. Ethan remained on the stairs, invisible to the scene below, his young mind struggling to understand why no one else seemed to see what he saw. Later that night, after dinner had been cleared and homework checked, Ethan lay in bed, listening to the house settle into its nighttime quiet. Through the wall, he could hear muffled sounds from Lily's room, not crying exactly, but the kind of shaky breathing that came before tears. He wanted to go to her, like she used to come to him when he had nightmares. But something told him to stay put. Instead, he clutched his stuffed dinosaur closer and whispered a prayer like his grandmother had taught him. Please keep Lily safe, he murmured into Rex's worn green fur. Please make Richard be nice. Please help Mom see. The wind outside his window had picked up, sending more leaves skittering across the dark street. In the distance, a siren wailed briefly before fading away. Ethan didn't know it yet, but in just a few days, he would be the one making that kind of siren come to Cedar Street. And nothing in their carefully constructed family life would ever be the same. The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of Lily's bedroom, casting striped shadows across her unmade bed. She stood before her mirror, tugging at the sleeves of yet another oversized sweater, making sure they covered her wrists completely. At 12, she was already mastering the art of invisibility. Lily, you're going to be late. Grace's voice carried up the stairs, tinged with the familiar morning stress of a working mother. Richard's leaving in 10 minutes. The mention of her stepfather's name made Lily's stomach clench. She grabbed her backpack, heavy with books she hadn't been able to focus on the night before, and headed downstairs. In the kitchen, Ethan sat at the table, small legs swinging as he spooned cereal into his mouth, his Spider-Man backpack ready beside him. There you are, Grace said, rushing past with a travel mug of coffee. Richard's giving you both a ride since I have an early shift. Lily, honey, you barely touched your breakfast. Not hungry, Lily mumbled, avoiding her mother's concerned look. She caught Ethan watching her, his young face serious. He seemed to notice everything lately. You need to eat properly, Richard interjected from his position by the counter, his tone carrying that edge that only Lily and Ethan seemed to hear. Especially since you quit soccer. Getting lazy isn't going to help your grades improve. Grace frowned, pausing in her morning rush. You quit soccer. When did this happen? Last week, Lily said quietly, studying the floor. I just didn't want to play anymore. But you love soccer, Grace protested. You've been playing since you were 6. Kids change, Grace, Richard cut in smoothly. Though the timing could be better, considering her recent academic performance. He checked his watch. We need to get going. I have a faculty meeting this morning. The drive to school was tense, filled only with the sound of morning radio and Ethan's occasional humming from the back seat. Lily pressed herself against the passenger door, trying to make herself as small as possible. As they pulled up to the elementary school first, she felt Richard's hand grip her knee. Remember what we talked about, he said quietly while Ethan gathered his things. No more embarrassing behavior. You're better than that, aren't you? Lily nodded mutely, relief flooding through her as Ethan's door opened. But her little brother paused before getting out. Lily, he said hesitantly. Will you come to my class's art show next week? I made something cool. Before Lily could respond, Richard answered for her. Your sister needs to focus on bringing up her grades, champ. Maybe another time. The look of disappointment on Ethan's face made Lily's heart ache. She waited until he had closed the door before whispering, I'll try to come. What was that? Richard's voice hardened as they pulled away from the elementary school. Nothing, Lily said quickly. But Richard's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Don't mumble. It's disrespectful. Just like your attitude lately. You think I enjoy getting emails from your teachers? Having to explain to my colleagues why my stepdaughter is performing so poorly? They were approaching her middle school now, but instead of pulling up to the drop-off zone, Richard turned into the teacher's parking lot, finding a spot in a secluded corner. Look at me when I'm talking to you, he demanded, turning in his seat. Lily forced herself to meet his gaze, trying to control her trembling. You're making me look bad, Lily. Making your mother worry. Is that what you want? No, she whispered. Then shape up. No more D's. No more attitude. No more of this sulking around the house like some victim. His voice dripped with contempt. You're pathetic, you know that. A pathetic little girl who can't even manage basic schoolwork. Now get out. And remember, one word to anyone about our private conversations, and things will get much worse. Understand? Lily nodded, fumbling with her seatbelt and practically falling out of the car in her haste to escape. She hurried across the parking lot, conscious of Richard watching her. Other students streamed past, laughing and talking, while teachers greeted each other with morning pleasantries. No one seemed to notice the girl in the oversized sweater, clutching her books to her chest like armor. In her first period English class, Lily tried to focus on The Giver, her favorite book from last year. But the words swam before her eyes as Mrs. Patterson discussed themes of conformity and silence. When called upon to participate, Lily's voice came out barely above a whisper, prompting snickers from some classmates. Lily, please speak up, Mrs. Patterson said kindly. We'd love to hear your thoughts. But Lily's throat had closed up entirely. She shook her head, shrinking into her seat as Mrs. Patterson moved on with a concerned glance. Once, Lily had loved this class, raising her hand eagerly to discuss the books she devoured at home. Now, her beloved novels sat untouched on her shelves, replaced by the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. During lunch, she found a quiet corner of the library, pulling out her math homework. The D on her last test felt like it was burning a hole in her backpack. She had always struggled with algebra, but lately, the numbers seemed impossible to grasp, her mind constantly scattered with worry about what mood Richard would be in when she got home. Hey, Lily, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Sophie, her best friend since 4th grade. We missed you at practice yesterday. Lily kept her eyes on her textbook. I quit. I know. But why? Coach Martinez said you could be captain next year. Sophie hesitated. Is everything okay? You seem different lately. For a moment, Lily almost broke. Sophie had been there through everything, her parents' divorce, her dad moving to California, her mom starting to date Richard. But Richard's words echoed in her head. Things will get much worse. She couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk him following through on his threats about what would happen if she spread lies about him. I'm fine, Lily said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face. Just busy with school stuff. Sophie didn't look convinced, but the bell rang before she could press further. Lily gathered her things quickly, avoiding her friend's worried gaze. In the hallway, she passed Richard's classroom and heard his voice carrying through the open door, warm and engaging as he discussed American history with his students. The contrast between this public persona and the man who had cornered her in the car that morning made her feel crazy. Like she was imagining everything. But the bruises hidden under her sweater were real. The way her hands shook when she heard his footsteps was real. The growing silence inside her, where words used to live, was real. That afternoon, instead of heading to soccer practice, Lily walked home alone. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under her feet as she took the long way, delaying the inevitable return to the house. She thought about Ethan's art show. About his small face lighting up whenever she paid attention to him. She used to be a good big sister, she thought. Used to protect him from monsters under the bed and bullies at the park. Now, she could barely protect herself. The kitchen clock read 7:43 p.m. as Ethan carefully poured milk over his second bowl of Cheerios. Mom was working the night shift at the hospital, leaving him and Lily with Richard again. The house felt different on these nights, tighter somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. "I can make you real dinner," Lily offered quietly from across the table. She'd barely touched her own cereal, pushing it around the bowl with mechanical movements. Richard's voice cut through from the living room. "He's already eating. Stop trying to baby him." A pause. Then, "Lily, get up here and help me grade these papers, since you're so familiar with failing grades." Ethan watched his sister's knuckles whiten around her spoon. "Go on," he whispered. "I'm okay." Lily rose from the table, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Ethan noticed she was still wearing her sweater, even though the heating was on full blast. As she headed upstairs, he remembered something his teacher, Miss Collins, had said during their safety assembly last week. "Trust your feelings. If something seems wrong, it probably is." A lot of things seemed wrong lately. He finished his cereal, listening to the muffled voices from upstairs. Richard's tone grew sharper, though Ethan couldn't make out the words. Then came a sound he recognized, Lily's attempt to hold back tears. The kind of hitched breathing she did when she was trying to be quiet about it. "Stupid girl." Richard's voice suddenly rang clear, followed by a thud. Ethan froze, his small body tensing. More thuds. Then a cry of pain that could only be Lily. His heart began racing as he remembered more of Miss Collins's words. "If you think someone is in danger, call 911. The operators are there to help, day or night." His socked feet made no sound as he crept to the kitchen drawer where Mom kept the emergency numbers. The old cordless phone felt heavy in his trembling hands. He could hear Richard yelling now, words like worthless and embarrassment, mixing with sounds that made Ethan's stomach hurt. Ducking into the pantry, Ethan pressed the numbers. 911. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 911, what's your emergency? Ethan's voice came out smaller than he meant it to. "I think my sister's getting hurt." "Okay, sweetheart. You're very, very brave for calling. Can you tell me your name and address?" "Ethan Baker. We live at 247 Cedar Street." Another crash from upstairs made him jump. "Please hurry. It's my stepdad, Richard. He's hurting Lily." "I'm sending officers right now, Ethan. Can you stay on the phone with me? I hear police." The words burst from him as distant sirens grew closer. Red and blue lights began flashing through the windows. "Ethan, find a safe place to wait. Don't try to intervene, okay?" He huddled deeper into the pantry as heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. Richard's voice boomed through the house. "What the hell?" The front door burst open with a crash that made Ethan cover his ears. Multiple voices filled the house, authoritative and urgent. "Police! Everyone freeze! What's going on?" Richard's voice had changed, becoming the smooth, reasonable tone he used at school. "There must be some mistake. Check upstairs," a female officer's voice cut through the chaos. More footsteps on the stairs. Then a gasp. "We need medical up here." Ethan crept out of the pantry, the phone still clutched to his chest. A tall officer spotted him, approaching slowly with hands raised. "Hey there, buddy. I'm Officer Mike. Did you make the call?" Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the stairs. "Is Lily okay?" Before the officer could answer, paramedics rushed through the front door with a stretcher. Richard was being handcuffed in the living room, his face red with rage as he caught sight of Ethan. "You little..." An officer clamped a hand over Richard's mouth, steering him roughly toward the door. "Don't look at him," Officer Mike said, positioning himself between Ethan and Richard. You did exactly the right thing, son. The paramedics descended the stairs with Lily on the stretcher. Ethan caught a glimpse of his sister's face, tear-streaked and bruised. But her eyes found his. Something passed between them. A look of relief. Mixed with fear. And something else. Pride, maybe. "Mom," Lily whispered as they wheeled her past. "Someone needs to call Mom." "We're contacting her now," a female officer assured her, following the stretcher. "Your mother's already on her way." The house seemed to exhale. Tension draining away with Richard's removal. Officer Mike knelt beside Ethan, who suddenly felt very tired. "Would you like to tell me what happened tonight?" Ethan looked at the phone in his hands. Then at the empty staircase. Where he'd watched his sister shrink away, day after day. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. "It started a long time ago," he began. "Richard, he was always mean to Lily. But tonight." As police photographers climbed the stairs and evidence technicians began their work, Ethan told his story. He told them about the changes in his sister. The fearful silences. The hidden bruises he'd glimpsed. He told them about Richard's two voices, the public one that fooled everyone, and the private one that hurt Lily. Through the window, he could see the ambulance's lights still flashing, illuminating the gathering neighbors in pulses of red and blue. Somewhere in that crowd, he knew, was his mother. About to discover how thoroughly their family life had been shattered. But as he finished his account, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Strength. He had done what adults were supposed to do. He had protected someone who needed help. The paralyzing fear that had gripped him for so long began to loosen its hold. Outside, autumn leaves skittered across the front walk where Richard had been led away in handcuffs. The night air gusted through the open front door, carrying away the heaviness that had settled over their home. Change had come to Cedar Street. Sudden and violent, but necessary, like the storms that sometimes swept through their neighborhood. This night would leave destruction in its wake. But it would also clear the air, making room for something new to grow. Detective Diana Chun had seen hundreds of interview rooms in her 15 years with Boston PD. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the small figure hunched in the oversized chair, feet barely touching the ground, clutching a dinosaur plushie that a patrol officer had retrieved from his room. Ethan Baker's eyes were tired but alert, taking in every detail of the child-friendly space. "That's a cool dinosaur," Detective Chun said, sliding a hot chocolate across the table. "Does he have a name?" "Rex," Ethan replied quietly. "Lily gave him to me for my birthday last year." At the mention of his sister's name, his small fingers tightened around the stuffed animal. Through the observation window, Grace Baker paced the hallway, her nurse's scrub still on from her interrupted shift, talking urgently with Dr. Rachel Morris, the department's child psychologist. "Ethan," Detective Chun began gently. "Can you tell me about tonight? About why you called 911? The boy's face scrunched in concentration. "Miss Collins, she's my teacher. She told us about emergency calls last week. She said if we think someone's in danger, we should call right away." He looked up at the detective. "I waited too long, didn't I? I should have called before." The simple admission hit Chun like a physical blow. "You did exactly the right thing, Ethan. None of this is your fault. Richard hurt Lily," he continued, his voice strengthening. "Not just tonight. Lots of times. He says mean things to her. Makes her feel bad. She stopped playing soccer. Stopped hanging out with Sophie. She wears big sweaters all the time now, even when it's hot." His lower lip trembled. "I heard him hitting her tonight. She was crying, but trying to be quiet about it. She always tries to be quiet." Chun nodded, making notes while keeping her voice steady. "What kinds of mean things did Richard say?" "He calls her stupid and worthless. Says she's embarrassing him at school. When mom's not home, he gets really angry about little things, like if Lily doesn't set the table fast enough or if she gets bad grades. Ethan's face darkened. But at school, he acts different. Everyone thinks he's nice. Nobody knows. A soft knock interrupted them. Dr. Morris entered, her gentle presence filling the room. "Ethan, your mom would like to see you. Would that be okay?" The boy nodded, sliding off the chair but keeping a firm grip on Rex. At the door, he turned back to Detective Chun. "Is Lily going to be okay?" "The doctors are taking good care of her," Chun assured him. "She's very proud of you, you know." After Ethan left, Chun reviewed her notes, adding them to the growing file on Richard Cooper. The preliminary medical report from the hospital documented Lily's injuries, bruising in various stages of healing, a sprained wrist, and evidence of ongoing physical abuse. But it was the psychological trauma that worried them most. The systematic breaking down of a 12-year-old girl's spirit. Through isolation. Through verbal abuse. Through intimidation. In the conference room down the hall, Grace Baker's world was shattering for the second time that night. Dr. Morris sat with her, explaining the signs they'd missed. The pattern of abuse that had developed right under their noses. "I worked so many shifts," Grace kept saying, her voice hollow. I thought I was providing for them. I thought he was helping. Taking care of them while I worked. How did I not see?" "Abusers are often skilled at manipulation," Dr. Morris explained gently. "They create isolation. Make their victims feel powerless and ashamed." Richard used his position as a teacher to add credibility to his actions, to make Lily's struggles seem like normal academic problems rather than symptoms of abuse. Grace pressed her hands to her face. All those times he offered to help with homework. To drive them to school. He was creating opportunities. And I thanked him for it. She looked up suddenly. "The school. They need to be notified. He can't be around children." "Detective Chun is handling that first thing in the morning," Dr. Morris assured her. "Right now, let's focus on your children. Lily will be released from the hospital tomorrow, but she'll need extensive support. Both your children will." In the hospital across town, Lily Baker lay in a pediatric bed, finally sleeping under mild sedation. The nurse had left the TV on quietly, some late-night cooking show providing gentle background noise. On the bedside table sat a small craft project, a painted clay turtle, clearly made by a 7-year-old hand. The nurse had delivered it earlier, along with a note in wobbly child's writing. To Lily. "I made this at school for the art show. You didn't get to come see it, but it's yours. Love, Ethan." The turtle's shell was a bit lopsided. The paint slightly smudged. But it represented something profound. A mother's love. A child's courage. And the first step toward healing for a family that had been silently breaking apart. Back at the station, Detective Chun added one final note to her report. Primary witness, Ethan Baker, age 7. Demonstrated remarkable awareness and courage in recognizing and reporting ongoing abuse. Recommend follow-up with victim support services for both children. She paused. Then added. Note, special attention should be paid to maintaining the strong sibling bond between Ethan and Lily Baker, as this relationship appears to be a crucial source of support for both children. The night shift was ending. But the case was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring school investigations. More interviews. And the long process of healing. But something fundamental had changed. The silence had been broken. And in its place, truth was finally finding its voice. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Detective Chun's office as she spread out the newly acquired personnel files from the 3 schools where Richard Cooper had previously taught. Each manila folder told a similar story. Excellent performance reviews. Glowing recommendations. And sudden mid-year transfers. Look at this pattern, she said to her partner, Detective Marcus Torres. 2018, Lakewood Middle School. 2020, Pine Valley Academy. 2022, Riverside Middle. Now here. She tapped their current file. All transfers requested during the school year. All with minimal documentation. Torres leaned over the timeline she'd constructed. And each school had at least one informal complaint filed by a female student. All between ages 11 and 13. Nothing ever made it to formal investigation because he was already gone. Standard Predator playbook, Chun finished. Move before the whispers get too loud. Her computer chimed with a new email. Opening it, her expression hardened. First interview transcript from Riverside Middle. Former student named Emma Walsh, now 14, reports verbal abuse and intimidation from Cooper when she was 12. She scanned the document. Says he would keep her after class. Tell her she was worthless. Stupid. Sound familiar? Just like Lily Baker, Torres nodded. Did he get physical with the others? No. But the pattern of emotional abuse is identical. He was escalating with each school. Getting bolder. Lily was just the first one he had constant access to. Down the hall, Dr. Morris was conducting her third session with Lily. The girl sat curled in an oversized armchair, her voice barely above a whisper as she described the months of torment. He said no one would believe me, Lily explained, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. That mom would be disappointed in me for making up lies. That I'd ruin everything if I told. But Ethan believed you, Dr. Morris prompted gently. Even without you having to tell him. For the first time that morning, Lily's face softened. He always knew something was wrong. He tried to distract Richard when he was getting angry. Or sit with me after bad days. She wiped her eyes. I was supposed to protect him, you know. I'm the big sister. But he ended up protecting me. And at Riverside Elementary, Miss Collins sat in the principal's office, recounting last week's safety assembly. I had no idea Ethan would need that information so soon, she said, her voice shaking. When the police called this morning, God. If we hadn't done that presentation. Principal Martinez leaned forward. You may have saved that girl's life, Sarah. And now we need to make sure this never happens again. I want every teacher trained on recognizing signs of abuse. New hiring protocols. Better background checks. Back at the station, Grace Baker sat with the district attorney, reviewing the growing mountain of evidence against her husband. Her hands trembled as she signed the restraining order paperwork. We have enough to put him away for a long time, the DA assured her. The physical abuse of Lily. The pattern of emotional abuse across multiple schools. No jury will sympathize with him. I want to make a statement, Grace said firmly. To the school board. The parents. Everyone. They need to know how he slipped through the cracks. How he used his position to hide what he was doing. In the hospital, Ethan had finally been allowed to visit his sister. He climbed carefully onto the edge of her bed, taking in the bruises on her face with solemn eyes. Does it hurt? He asked, touching her hand gently. Not so much now, Lily answered. She managed a small smile. I like your turtle. Yeah. Ethan brightened. I made it blue 'cause that's your favorite color. Even though real turtles aren't blue. It's perfect, Lily said, her voice catching. Ethan, thank you. For calling them. For seeing what was happening when nobody else did. Miss Collins says sometimes kids can see things better than grown-ups, Ethan replied seriously. She says we should trust our feelings. You're pretty smart for a 7-year-old, you know that. That's 'cause I have a smart big sister. The simple exchange brought tears to Grace's eyes as she watched from the doorway. Dr. Morris stood beside her, observing the interaction. They're going to need each other more than ever during the recovery process, the psychologist noted. But that bond, it's remarkable. Ethan's actions didn't just stop the abuse. They showed Lily that she deserves to be protected. That she has value. By evening, Detective Chun had compiled enough evidence to ensure Richard Cooper would never teach again. The investigation had opened a floodgate. More former students coming forward hourly. Each story reinforced the pattern. Painting a picture of a predator who had systematically targeted vulnerable young girls. Using his authority to break them down, piece by piece. But in that hospital room, watching her children's quiet interaction, Grace saw something else. The beginning of healing. The slow rebuilding of trust. And the extraordinary courage of a 7-year-old boy. Who had refused to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. The buried secrets were finally surfacing. Bringing with them both pain. And possibility. The possibility of justice. Of recovery. And of a future where neither of her children would ever have to feel afraid in their own home again. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Detective Chun's office as she spread out the newly acquired personnel files from the 3 schools where Richard Cooper had previously taught. Each manila folder told a similar story. Excellent performance reviews. Glowing recommendations. And sudden mid-year transfers. "Look at this pattern," she said to her partner, Detective Marcus Torres. 2018, Lakewood Middle School. 2020, Pine Valley Academy. 2022, Riverside Middle. Now here. She tapped their current file. All transfers requested during the school year. All with minimal documentation. Torres leaned over the timeline she'd constructed. And each school had at least one informal complaint filed by a female student. All between ages 11 and 13. Nothing ever made it to formal investigation because he was already gone. Standard Predator playbook, Chun finished. Move before the whispers get too loud. Her computer chimed with a new email. Opening it, her expression hardened. First interview transcript from Riverside Middle. Former student named Emma Walsh, now 14, reports verbal abuse and intimidation from Cooper when she was 12. She scanned the document. Says he would keep her after class. Tell her she was worthless. Stupid. Sound familiar? Just like Lily Baker, Torres nodded. Did he get physical with the others? No. But the pattern of emotional abuse is identical. He was escalating with each school. Getting bolder. Lily was just the first one he had constant access to. Down the hall, Dr. Morris was conducting her 3rd session with Lily. The girl sat curled in an oversized armchair, her voice barely above a whisper as she described the months of torment. He said no one would believe me, Lily explained, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. That mom would be disappointed in me for making up lies. That I'd ruin everything if I told. But Ethan believed you, Dr. Morris prompted gently. Even without you having to tell him. For the first time that morning, Lily's face softened. He always knew something was wrong. He tried to distract Richard when he was getting angry. Or sit with me after bad days. She wiped her eyes. I was supposed to protect him, you know. I'm the big sister. But he ended up protecting me. And at Riverside Elementary, Miss Collins sat in the principal's office, recounting last week's safety assembly. I had no idea Ethan would need that information so soon, she said, her voice shaking. When the police called this morning, God. If we hadn't done that presentation. Principal Martinez leaned forward. You may have saved that girl's life, Sarah. And now we need to make sure this never happens again. I want every teacher trained on recognizing signs of abuse. New hiring protocols. Better background checks. Back at the station, Grace Baker sat with the district attorney, reviewing the growing mountain of evidence against her husband. Her hands trembled as she signed the restraining order paperwork. "We have enough to put him away for a long time," the DA assured her. The physical abuse of Lily. The pattern of emotional abuse across multiple schools. No jury will sympathize with him. "I want to make a statement," Grace said firmly. "To the school board. The parents. Everyone. They need to know how he slipped through the cracks. How he used his position to hide what he was doing." In the hospital, Ethan had finally been allowed to visit his sister. He climbed carefully onto the edge of her bed, taking in the bruises on her face with solemn eyes. "Does it hurt?" he asked, touching her hand gently. "Not so much now," Lily answered. She managed a small smile. "I like your turtle." "Yeah." Ethan brightened. "I made it blue 'cause that's your favorite color. Even though real turtles aren't blue." "It's perfect," Lily said, her voice catching. "Ethan, thank you. For calling them. For seeing what was happening when nobody else did. Miss Collins says sometimes kids can see things better than grown-ups," Ethan replied seriously. "She says we should trust our feelings. You're pretty smart for a 7-year-old, you know that." "That's 'cause I have a smart big sister." The simple exchange brought tears to Grace's eyes as she watched from the doorway. Dr. Morris stood beside her, observing the interaction. "They're going to need each other more than ever during the recovery process," the psychologist noted. "But that bond, it's remarkable." Ethan's actions didn't just stop the abuse. They showed Lily that she deserves to be protected. That she has value. By evening, Detective Chun had compiled enough evidence to ensure Richard Cooper would never teach again. The investigation had opened a floodgate. More former students coming forward hourly. Each story reinforced the pattern. Painting a picture of a predator who had systematically targeted vulnerable young girls. Using his authority to break them down, piece by piece. But in that hospital room, watching her children's quiet interaction, Grace saw something else. The beginning of healing. The slow rebuilding of trust. And the extraordinary courage of a 7-year-old boy. Who had refused to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. The buried secrets were finally surfacing. Bringing with them both pain. And possibility. The possibility of justice. Of recovery. And of a future where neither of her children would ever have to feel afraid in their own home again. Dr. Morris's office was painted in soft blues and greens, with comfortable chairs and large windows overlooking a small garden. It was here that Lily Baker found herself for the 4th time that week, curled up in what had become her chair, a weighted blanket across her lap. "I had the dream again," she said before Dr. Morris could ask. "The one where I'm trying to scream, but nothing comes out." Dr. Morris nodded, making a gentle note. "That's very common, Lily. Your mind is processing the times you felt voiceless. Would you like to talk about when those feelings started?" In another room down the hall, Ethan sat with Claire Jensen, the children's counselor, building a tower with blocks. Each block had a feeling written on it: scared, brave, worried, proud, angry, safe. "Which one describes how you feel today?" Claire asked, watching as Ethan carefully selected a block. "This one." He held up confused. "Mom's crying a lot, even when she tries to hide it. And Lily's different at Aunt Sarah's house. She jumps when doors close." "It's okay to feel confused," Claire assured him. "Your family's been through something very hard. But you're all working on healing together." At the Baker house, now empty of Richard's belongings, Grace met with Detective Chun. They sat at the kitchen table, where so many silent dinners had taken place, reviewing new developments in the case. "2 more students came forward yesterday," Chun explained. "Both with similar stories. The DA is confident about the case, but we want to spare Lily from testifying if possible." Grace clutched her coffee mug. "She barely sleeps. Keeps checking the locks on her door at Sarah's house. She insists on keeping the lights on all night. That's why these sessions with Dr. Morris are so important, Chun said gently. Both your children are showing remarkable resilience. But they need time and support to process everything. Later that afternoon, Lily sat cross-legged on her bed in Aunt Sarah's guest room, attempting to complete her math homework. A soft knock made her tense before Ethan's voice came through the door. Can I come in? I brought cookies. Lily smiled faintly. Yeah, come on. Ethan entered carefully, balancing a plate of chocolate chip cookies and 2 glasses of milk. Aunt Sarah helped me make them. Well, mostly she made them, but I stirred. He settled beside her on the bed, peering at her textbook. Is it hard? Not as hard as before, Lily admitted. My head feels clearer now that. She trailed off, then forced herself to continue. Now that he's gone. Ethan nodded seriously, dunking a cookie in his milk. Claire says it's good to say things out loud. Even the scary things. She says it makes them less powerful. Your counselor sounds smart. Yeah. We play games and talk about feelings. Today I built a tower of feelings. He glanced at her homework. Want help? I'm good at numbers. Lily felt a laugh bubble up, small, but real. You're in 2nd grade. So. I can still help. Like you used to help me with reading. The simple reminder of their life before, of homework sessions, shared snacks, and sibling teasing, brought unexpected tears to Lily's eyes. Ethan noticed immediately, his face falling. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you sad. No, no. Lily wiped her eyes. They're good tears, I missed this. Missed being your big sister. You never stopped, Ethan said with 7-year-old certainty. You were always my big sister, even when you were sad. In the kitchen downstairs, Sarah watched her sister, Grace, prepare dinner, noting how she'd rearranged the kitchen, removing all traces of Richard's presence. The support group helps, Grace was saying. Hearing other parents. Knowing I'm not alone in missing the signs. But God, Sarah, watching them heal, it's like seeing them become themselves again. Piece by piece. Sarah squeezed her hand. They have you. They have each other. And they have time. Time to feel safe again. To trust again. That evening, as the autumn sun set earlier and earlier, the makeshift family gathered around Sarah's dining table. The conversation was quieter than in past years. More careful. But real. Ethan told jokes from his lunch table at school. Lily mentioned maybe, possibly thinking about rejoining the soccer team in spring. Grace and Sarah discussed plans for redecorating the kids' rooms once they moved back home. Small steps, Dr. Morris would have said. Building blocks for a new kind of normal. Later, when Ethan had fallen asleep watching cartoons and Grace had gone to take a much-needed bath, Lily found herself in the kitchen with her aunt. Sarah was loading the dishwasher, humming softly to herself. Aunt Sarah. Do you think? Lily hesitated, then pressed on. Do you think we'll be okay? All of us? Sarah turned, really looking at her niece. At the shadows under her eyes. But also at the growing strength in her posture. The way she no longer made herself small. I think, Sarah said carefully, that okay looks different for everyone. But yes, sweetheart. You'll be okay. You already are okay. You're standing here, asking the question. That's bravery. Upstairs, Ethan stirred in his sleep, clutching Rex the dinosaur. In her bath, Grace finally allowed herself to cry. Not from guilt this time. But from relief. And determination. And in the kitchen, Lily Baker stood straighter, letting her aunt's words sink in. They were all learning to be brave in different ways. Learning to trust the silence again. Because now, it was their choice. Not a prison. But a peace they were building together. One day at a time, Detective Chun sat at her desk, reviewing the latest victim impact statements. Emma Walsh's testimony had opened the floodgates. 23 girls had come forward in the past 2 weeks. Each with their own story of Richard Cooper's abuse of power and trust. Officer Mike Roberts appeared in her doorway. "There's someone here you need to talk to." Former administrator from Lakewood Middle School, Margaret Winters, looked every bit the retired vice principal, silver hair, sensible shoes, and eyes heavy with regret. She placed a thick folder on Chun's desk. "I kept copies," she said quietly. "Against policy. But I knew something wasn't right about those transfers. The way he'd focus on certain girls. Always the vulnerable ones, single parents, recent divorces, struggling grades." Chun opened the folder, finding detailed notes, dates, and observations spanning 3 years. "Why didn't you report this earlier?" "I tried." Winter's voice cracked. "But he was so careful. Never left evidence. Always had explanations. The parents trusted him. He'd offer extra help, mentoring. By the time I gathered enough to build a case, he'd transfer. Start fresh somewhere else." She looked up, eyes fierce. "But I kept tracking him. That's all there, every complaint, every suspicious interaction. I knew someday someone would need this." Across town, Grace sat in the conference room of her lawyer's office, reviewing the divorce papers. The words blurred before her eyes. Irreconcilable differences. Sole custody. Restraining order. "The school district wants to settle," her lawyer explained. "They're facing serious liability for failing to investigate the previous incidents. We can use that to ensure the children's future security." Grace thought of the therapy bills. Lily's upcoming surgery for her injured wrist. The lost income from taking leave to care for her children. "I don't want their money. I want them to change how they handle abuse allegations. I want protocols in place so this never happens to another child." "We can demand both," her lawyer assured her. "Policy changes. Mandatory reporting training. And compensation for your family's suffering." At Riverside Middle School, Principal Martinez sat with the school board, presenting the findings of their internal investigation. The atmosphere was tense. Faces grim as they reviewed the systematic failures that had allowed Richard Cooper to move from school to school. "We found a pattern of dismissed complaints," Martinez reported. "Not just here, but across districts. Teachers who noticed concerning behavior were discouraged from formal reporting. Transfer requests were processed without proper investigation. The system protected him. Not the students." In Dr. Morris's office, Lily was having a breakthrough session. For the first time, she spoke about the earliest incidents. The subtle ways Richard had begun undermining her confidence. Long before the physical abuse started. "It was like he was erasing me," she explained, twisting a tissue in her hands. "First my voice. Then my friends. Then soccer. Everything that made me, me. And I let him. Because I thought I deserved it." "But you know now that you didn't deserve any of it," Dr. Morris prompted gently. "Yeah." Lily's voice strengthened. "Ethan knew. He saw me, the real me, even when I couldn't see myself anymore." At the elementary school, Ethan's class was doing an art project about heroes. While other kids drew Superman and Wonder Woman, Ethan carefully drew a picture of 2 figures holding hands. One tall. One small. "Who are they?" his teacher asked. "Me and Lily," he answered, coloring the smaller figure's shirt blue, his sister's favorite color. "Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they just tell the truth." Detective Chun added Margaret Winters's documents to the growing case file. Each page reinforced the calculated nature of Richard's abuse. How he'd selected his victims. Isolated them. Convinced them they were worthless. While maintaining a sterling reputation among his colleagues. But the truth was finally emerging. Not in whispers this time. But in strong, clear voices. Emma Walsh's voice, steady as she described the degrading comments that had driven her to attempt suicide. Margaret Winters's voice, heavy with years of frustrated attempts to protect her students. Grace's voice, firm as she demanded institutional change. And most powerfully, the voices of Lily and Ethan Baker. A sister and brother whose bond had proved stronger than the silence their abuser had tried to enforce. Their story was becoming a catalyst for change. Forcing schools to confront their failures. And implement new protections. The truth, once buried under layers of institutional negligence and calculated manipulation, was finally seeing light. And in that light, healing could begin. Not just for the Baker family, but for all the children who would be protected by the changes their courage had sparked. The courthouse loomed over them. Its brick facade catching the early morning light. Lily stood at the bottom of the steps, her hand firmly clasped in her mother's, while Ethan held tight to her other hand. They formed a small chain of strength as District Attorney Sarah Martinez approached. "You ready?" Martinez asked gently. Her briefcase contained months of gathered evidence. Photographs. Medical reports. Testimony transcripts. And Margaret Winters's meticulous documentation. "Do I have to look at him?" Lily's voice was quiet but steady. "No, sweetheart. You just look at me or your mom. And remember, Ethan's testimony yesterday was so strong that we might not even need you to speak." Inside the courtroom, Detective Chun sat with a row of former students. Emma Walsh. Sophie Carter. Katie Rodriguez. And others. Each girl representing a different chapter in Richard Cooper's history of abuse. They had all come to support Lily. To stand witness to the truth they'd been too afraid to speak before. Grace squeezed Lily's hand as Richard was led in. Wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual pressed shirts. He looked smaller somehow. Less imposing. Without his teacher's authority to hide behind. When he tried to look their way, Officer Mike Roberts deliberately stepped into his line of sight. The prosecutor's opening statement laid bare the years of systematic abuse. Richard Cooper used his position as an educator to identify, isolate, and abuse vulnerable young girls. He moved from school to school, leaving a trail of shattered confidence and silenced voices. But today, those voices will be heard. Margaret Winters testified first. Her silver hair catching the fluorescent lights as she detailed her years of frustrated attempts to expose Richard's behavior. She read from her notes, dating back to his time at Lakewood Middle School. Student A, age 12, crying in bathroom after conference with Mr. Cooper. Reports being called worthless. Stupid. Embarrassment to her family. Emma Walsh followed. Describing how Richard's emotional abuse had driven her to the brink of suicide. He would keep me after class. Tell me I was pathetic. That no one would ever believe me. I started believing him. Then came Ethan's testimony from the previous day. Played back on video to spare him from having to repeat it. The courtroom fell silent as they watched the 7-year-old explain, with remarkable clarity, how he had recognized the signs of abuse. Lily stopped being Lily. His recorded voice said simply. She got quiet and scared. Richard acted nice when Mom was home. But mean when she wasn't. Miss Collins taught us about calling 911 if someone's in danger. So when I heard Lily crying and Richard hurting her, I called.